3:10 p.m. Central Sulawesi. The airfield at Palu is small, wedged between mountains and the sea, one narrow strip of asphalt framed by shimmering heat. A Boeing 737 sits ready for departure. Engines idle. Passengers buckle in. Everything is routine. Inside the cockpit, the pilot, a man who's flown this route countless times, runs his final checklist. Fuel, flaps, cabin secure, clearance pending. But then, something shifts. A sudden stillness. The faintest whisper, not through the headset, but from somewhere deep within his awareness. A single phrase, clear and undeniable. Go, now. No alert from air traffic control, no change in weather. Just a feeling, urgent, absolute. The kind of instinct pilots are trained to ignore, unless every fiber of their being says otherwise. Against protocol, he calls for immediate takeoff. The tower hesitates, but grants permission. Engines roar. The plane accelerates down the narrow runway, lifting into the humid air at 3:17 p.m. As the aircraft climbs, the pilot glances down. Below, the town glows faintly in the afternoon sun. Families, markets, quiet roads, unaware of what's about to happen. 3 minutes later, the ground begins to move. The control tower trembles. The runway fractures. In less than 60 seconds, an earthquake measuring 7.5 on the Richter scale tears through Palu. The same runway he departed from. Gone. The controller who cleared him for takeoff, still inside the tower. And then, the sea begins to rise. At 3:27 p.m., a tsunami hits the coastline. Everything below, engulfed. The pilot, now miles above the devastation, has no idea what just happened. Only later will he realize those 3 minutes made all the difference. Sometimes, survival begins with a whisper. To understand what happened that afternoon, we rewind just a few hours. September 28, 2018. Central Sulawesi, an island chain suspended between the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, where the ground beneath is alive, shifting, unpredictable. The city of Palu rests at the end of a long bay, bordered by mountains on 3 sides, a natural amphitheater for disaster. Beneath it lies the Palu-Koro fault line, one of the fastest slipping faults in Indonesia. Every few decades, the stress resets, violently. But on this day, no one knew what was coming. The sky was clear, winds calm. For most in Palu, it was just another Friday. The airport, Mutiara Sisal Jufri, handled only a handful of flights a day, mostly small commercial routes connecting remote towns. Among them, one flight bound for Ujung Pandang, scheduled for 3:15 p.m. departure. The man in command was a veteran pilot, disciplined, punctual, a believer. Colleagues described him as calm under pressure, almost serene. That afternoon, he arrived at the airport earlier than usual, uneasy for reasons he couldn't explain. He later recalled a stirring, not an audible voice exactly, but something he felt deep inside, a message, a warning. Depart as soon as possible. At 3:10 p.m., with clearance still pending, he requested early departure. In the tower, a 21-year-old controller named Antonius Gunawan Agung gave the go-ahead, holding his position until the plane safely lifted off. 30 seconds after takeoff, the control tower began to shake. Agung stayed at his post until the plane cleared the airspace. Then, as the tower collapsed, he jumped, saving the crew above but losing his own life below. When the news reached the pilot later that evening, he wept. He said he'd felt as if a guardian had been watching over his flight, a voice urging him forward, while another stayed behind. In a single 3-minute window, hundreds of lives diverged, one path rising to safety, another vanishing into chaos. But how did that warning come? Intuition? Coincidence? Something deeper? Beneath the calm waters of Palu Bay lies one of the most restless seams on Earth, the Palu-Koro Fault. 2 vast slabs of crust grind past one another at a rate of 5 centimeters per year, the slow-motion violence that shapes mountains and ends cities. For decades, strain had been building silently, like a spring wound too tight. On September 28th, at exactly 18:02:44 local time, that spring snapped. The rupture tore through 150 kilometers of crust in under 30 seconds, a supersonic shear that released energy equivalent to 200 atomic bombs. At the surface, the ground heaved. Asphalt buckled. Roads twisted into waves. And in the tower, a young controller refused to leave until one departing aircraft had cleared the sky. The quake triggered a secondary catastrophe. Along the narrow, funnel-shaped Palu Bay, the seafloor shifted vertically, displacing millions of cubic meters of water. Within minutes, a wall of water up to 6 meters high raced toward shore. But here's the terrifying part. Most early warning buoys along this coastline were offline for maintenance. The sensors that might have sounded the alarm, silent. The only warnings came from the natural world itself, the brief retreat of the ocean, a sudden stillness in the air. And for one pilot, a voice that said, "Go." Had the plane waited its scheduled departure, it would have been taxiing on a runway that cracked open within 60 seconds. The shock waves reached the surface faster than the tower's evacuation order could. Even a 2-minute delay would have been fatal. Data models later showed that the aircraft climbed through the upper edge of the seismic plume, turbulence from shock waves reverberating through the air like invisible ripples. From the cockpit, it might have felt like brief, meaningless bumps. But below, Palu was breaking apart. Every second of altitude gained was distance from disaster. At 3 minutes, they were safe. At 4 minutes, the ground beneath the runway was gone. But what exactly was that voice? A subconscious warning? A spiritual nudge? A product of years of flying instinct? To understand that, we have to look closer at the human mind and the fragile boundary between intuition and impossibility. In aviation, instinct is often the final layer of safety. That moment when all the training, all the checklists, compress into a single human impulse. For the captain of Flight 6321, that impulse arrived as a whisper he could not name. He said it wasn't fear. It wasn't logic. It was certainty. He had flown this route dozens of times before. Same path, same altitude, same routine. But that day, something inside him said, "Do not wait." There's a word pilots use: situational intuition. The subconscious pattern matching that can detect anomalies before conscious thought can name them. Could that have been all it was? Or was it something else entirely? At 3:10 p.m., he requested early clearance. The voice on the other end, calm, young, composed, replied, "Runway clear. You are good to go." His name was Anthonius Gunawan Agung, 21 years old, just 2 years into his post. Friends described him as quiet, dutiful, and meticulous. In the chaos that followed, he became a symbol of selfless courage. When the earthquake hit, the tower began to collapse. Agung could have fled, but he stayed. Stayed to guide the departing flight out of danger. Stayed until he heard the pilot's final confirmation. Airborne. Then he leapt from the tower, a 20-meter drop onto the shaking ground. He was alive when rescuers reached him. Hours later, he succumbed to his injuries. The pilot would not learn of his sacrifice until much later, when images of the destroyed control tower appeared on television screens across the world. "He was my guardian angel," the captain said. "He cleared me to fly, and then he stayed behind." In that moment, a silent link connected 2 lives, one ascending, one falling. One obeyed a voice to leave, the other obeyed duty to stay. And together they drew the invisible line between life and loss. 2 signals, 1 decision, countless lives spared. But not everyone believes it was instinct. Some call it divine intervention. Others call it coincidence, sharpened by trauma. Either way, something guided that moment. And the deeper investigators looked, the stranger it became. What made the pilot depart early? The rational mind demands evidence. The human heart looks for meaning. Between them lies a mystery science can't fully chart, the thin membrane where instinct becomes something else. Investigators, theologians, and psychologists all studied that moment, each searching for a different kind of truth. Theory 1: Instinctual intelligence. The first theory centers on instinct. Pilots develop what researchers call automatic cognition, the ability to sense irregularities faster than conscious thought can process them. Microclues. A shift in wind pressure, a tone in the radio static, the subtlest vibration in the fuselage. Over thousands of hours, the brain learns to detect danger without explanation. It's not a voice. It's the sum of every signal, synthesized into one wordless command: go. In that sense, the voice wasn't mystical. It was data, compressed, interpreted, and delivered at the speed of survival. Theory 2. Coincidence and timing. The second theory, pure coincidence. Statistically, the quake's timing and the aircraft's early departure might simply overlap. Had the pilot waited another few minutes, the outcome could have been catastrophic. But probability doesn't imply prophecy. Some call it chance, others, the chaos of nature colliding with human decision, the randomness that decides who stands in the sun and who stands in the shadow. But if coincidence alone explains survival, why does it feel so intentional? Why do moments of perfect timing echo like design? Theory 3. Spiritual intervention. And then, there's the other possibility, the one that logic can't disprove, only observe. The captain himself described the experience as a warning from God. He said he'd never heard anything like it before or since, and when he learned that the young controller who cleared him had died moments later, he said he believed that same voice had spoken through both of them. In this view, the signal wasn't internal. It was divine. A transfer of purpose between two people bound by duty and fate. Science demands replication. Faith requires only recognition. Somewhere between those two lies the truth, not proven, not disproven, just felt. Whether it was intuition, coincidence, or intervention, one fact remains. A pilot heard something. He acted. And because of that, everyone on board survived. Yet even this explanation leaves something unanswered. Because when experts revisited the seismic data, they found a signal, one that shouldn't exist. A pulse recorded in the ionosphere moments before the quake, a kind of earthborn whisper captured by satellite. In the aftermath, scientists scoured every form of data they could find. Seismic records, air pressure logs, satellite telemetry, even stray radio bursts. They weren't looking for miracles, they were looking for patterns. One research team noticed something unusual. A brief electromagnetic pulse, captured by a Japanese satellite, less than 60 seconds before the first seismic rupture. It lasted just under 3 seconds. Frequency range, 8 to 14 Hz. The same band sometimes produced by lightning strikes, volcanic tremor, and, intriguingly, by the human brain in moments of extreme stress. Could this be coincidence? A measurement error? Possibly, but it wasn't alone. Independent stations across Southeast Asia recorded subtle atmospheric disturbances seconds before the quake. Localized changes in the ionosphere, as if the Earth itself had sent a ripple upward through the air. Some scientists believe this is the result of lithospheric-ionospheric coupling, stress along the fault-releasing charged particles that distort the air's electrical field. But others see something different. An encoded warning, a natural signal transmitted through systems too complex for us to yet decode. Across the world, similar anomalies have been recorded hours or minutes before earthquakes. Dogs barking without reason. Radio static and frequencies once thought immune to interference. Even in rare cases, pilots reporting pressure sensations moments before seismic rupture. When investigators synchronized the flight's departure time with the seismic model, they noticed something astonishing. The aircraft left the ground precisely as the first P wave, the fastest-moving seismic vibration, reached the surface. In other words, the pilot's engines spooled up at the exact moment the Earth below began to break. Did he somehow feel that release, through sound, vibration, or electromagnetic change, before the instruments could register it? Human senses can detect subtle environmental shifts we rarely acknowledge. Barometric pressure, infrasound, even geomagnetic fluctuations. Perhaps the voice wasn't supernatural at all. Perhaps it was the planet itself, whispering in a frequency our conscious minds can't translate. The voice of the Earth, carried as pressure, encoded as intuition, interpreted as warning. We don't yet understand what these precursors mean, but the data is there. It's real. Something happens before the rupture. We just haven't learned to listen. If that's true, then perhaps intuition isn't the opposite of science, but its earliest form. 3 minutes before disaster, one man acted on a signal we still don't fully understand. But this discovery raises a darker question. If the Earth can warn us, why didn't we hear it sooner? Because maybe the warning wasn't meant for us. Maybe it was meant for one person who was listening. The data stops here. The signal, that strange, fleeting pulse before the quake, fades into noise. But in the silence that follows, something lingers. It's as if the Earth exhaled, and we caught a fragment of that breath without realizing what it meant. Down below, a city was seconds from vanishing. Up here, inside a pressurized capsule of steel and faith, one man felt a presence, a whisper, a pull to move. Science records the timing. Faith remembers the moment, but neither can explain the connection between them. When we study disaster, we look for patterns, measurable, mechanical, predictable. But some patterns resist the equation. They live in the space between numbers, where instinct feels like signal and randomness feels like reason. What if we've mistaken silence for emptiness? What if the planet does speak? Not in words, but in impulses only the few can sense. Every catastrophe begins with a moment like this, the instant before impact, when time folds in on itself and the world seems to hold its breath. And in that breath, there's always someone, somewhere, who hears something. Maybe it's instinct, maybe it's faith, maybe it's something older, the residual intelligence of a planet that's been trying to warn us all along. Because if the Earth can send a signal, and if one person, by chance or by calling, can hear it, then every disaster we survive might not just be luck, it might be communication. Which leaves one final question. If the planet is speaking, who will listen next time? The city of Palu has rebuilt now, runways repaved, towers reconstructed. Life, stubborn, fragile, persistent, has returned to the shoreline. But some memories never quite settle. For those who were there, the question still echoes. Why that pilot? Why that moment? Why 3 minutes? No more, no less. He says he still hears the whisper sometimes. Not often, not clearly, but in turbulence, in crosswinds, in those moments between calm and chaos. There's a quiet reminder. Go now. 2 words that changed everything. Psychologists call it intuition. Physicists call it probability. The faithful call it divine. And maybe they're all describing the same thing, just using different names for the same frequency. Because across every field of knowledge, from neuroscience to seismology, one truth keeps resurfacing. Sometimes the body knows before the mind. Sometimes the Earth warns before it breaks. And sometimes a single human being becomes the bridge between the two. 3 minutes early meant 48 souls in the sky instead of on the ground. One man's obedience to a whisper spared every passenger aboard. One controller's refusal to leave his post saved them all and cost him his life. There are numbers that can measure magnitude, and there are moments that cannot. How do you calculate courage? How do you quantify faith? Perhaps the truest mystery isn't the voice that told him to leave, but the system that made him listen. What if intuition is not supernatural at all, but nature itself speaking through us? Maybe our bodies are antennas, tuned, however faintly, to the vibrations of a living planet. And in moments of crisis, those frequencies align. The Earth calls, we act, and meaning follows in the silence after. The pilot's story reminds us of one timeless truth. Sometimes survival doesn't come from the systems we build, but from the signals we still don't understand.